Thank you very much, and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here in Manchester talking to all of you about the issues around autism. And I'm particularly pleased to be here today as an opportunity to say thank you and congratulations to the National Autistic Society on its 50th birthday. And again, really just to say thank you very much to everyone who is involved in practice. I also want to say thank you to parents, to carers, to teachers, and to the friends of those with autism, because I think together, if we put all those people together, what we're talking about across the country is a significant amount of effort being put in to make real differences to the lives of thousands of our fellow citizens. And I think really what I want to try and do today is provide a bit of national context, talk a bit about the legislative context, and say a bit about some of the things that are happening and the things that the Department of Health is taking forward in support of that. Because, of course, what counts as a fulfilling life for someone with autism isn't necessarily the same thing that everyone else would consider. Someone who is a neurotypical, as one might call it, when it comes to autistic spectrum disorders. And I just really wanted to recount a story from my experience of chairing the programme board. A little while ago, we had a session where John Simpson, who is a member of the board, gave a presentation to us about his life and about his experience as someone with autism. And he spoke about his personal aims and ambitions, about what motivated him and what motivated other people with autism. And of course, he wasn't talking about the desire to earn money or pleasing his parents or owning the latest gadget or fancy new car. He was talking about his special interest. And for him, his special interest just happened to be trains. He emphasised that it can vary hugely as to precisely what the special interest is. And he was saying how most neurotypicals just don't get that special interest and how important it can be to understanding and unlocking the potential of a person with autism. And that the most predictable and in some cases most valuable, most exciting things in the lives of people with autism can be those special interests. And that what most people might find strange or unexpected, or may even themselves consider unimportant, are absolutely central to that person's life. They are the things that motivate them. They are the things that provide a connection, a very real and tangible connection to the world around them. And in a way, that presentation was the most powerful presentation I think the board has had for a very long time, because it just made it real. It brought it back to everyday life. And it reminded us, fundamentally, that we should stop making presumptions and assumptions about people, whether they are neurotypical or not. And that is the key that can make such a difference to understanding and delivering appropriate support, appropriate services, and enabling people to fulfil their potential. So I wanted to just say a bit about the legislation. You very kindly said in your introduction that I played some small part in supporting the passage of the Private Members Bill, the now Autism Act. And I think it's one of those occasions when Parliament was at its best, when Parliament was not in the news for the wrong reasons. It was not generating more heat than light. It was, in fact, shedding, I think, a very important set of issues and shining a very important light on those issues. And it was an occasion when MPs across parties were united by a common cause. And the Autism Act, I think, is a very important example of how Parliament can make a real difference, because it placed in statute the rights and the support that people with autism should expect from local authorities and from the NHS. So the Autism Act 2009, I think, really does constitute an important landmark, a landmark in legislation, because it was and is the first ever disability-specific law. And it has led to the development of the autism strategy, which was developed, to be fair, by the last administration, and which has been picked up and taken forward by the coalition government, and has led to the work that we have done leading up to the production of the statutory guidance that was published just over a year ago now for local authorities and the NHS. And the strategy made it clear that for it to be a success, for it to be more than just another document with words gathering dust on a shelf somewhere. It had to be about long-term cultural change, and it had to be about taking the right actions right across the public sector. And since then, I think we've seen some real progress and some real successes. For example, the North East Autism Consortium, which regularly brings together local authority and NHS lead commissioners. And I know you've spent a fair amount of today talking about commissioning activity, to share their experiences and drive forward their priorities, all the while involving, and I think this is absolutely key, involving people with autism directly in that process. And once, after they've received a diagnosis, often quite a battle in itself, I understand, people would then feel that they had no one to turn to. And putting in place the right systems there is important as well. So the consortium has supported the development of improved adult assessment and diagnostic services, with particular attention being given to the follow-up and signposting of local support groups. And something which I think is a very important contribution to this area is the development of personal budgets, which have begun to make, I think, a real difference where they are being used in people's lives, not just in social care, but increasingly in health as well. For example, I know of a man not far from here who has autism and OCD. And after college, he moved back to live at home with his parents. And he risked becoming isolated and alone. And his family also needed to have time for themselves, time away, and breaks from supporting him. And with 10 hours a week of a personal budget, he now employs a support worker who shares his interest. And this gives him and his family regular breaks from each other and helps him to become more independent. And he's now just recently been able to get a part-time job as well. So I think personal budgets can be a very powerful way of giving people choice and control over their own lives, and a degree of flexibility that means people can be creative about how they spend their money, making every penny really count and really getting them what is most important in their lives. So, for example, in Liverpool, there are 3 families who come together and use the flexibilities that Liverpool provided when it comes to personal budgets to allow them to pool those personal budgets to pay for supported accommodation. Again, something that they couldn't have done on their own, but through that flexibility they have been able to realise. But while there have been some parts of the country where progress is being made, and I hope today you've been sharing those examples, and it has been made in those areas, I think, in leaps and bounds, there are other areas that still clearly have a long way to travel. And I think a central tenet of the autism strategy is that adults with autism should be able to access the same service as everyone else. So if someone with autism is being assessed for social care, their autism should be taken into account regardless of their IQ, something that we heard loud and clear whilst we were consulting on the statutory guidance and is there clear in black and white. And if they are looking for work, Job Centre Plus should find suitable positions that they are sensitive to their needs. And to reap the full potential of the Act, local authorities and the local NHS need to work together and to cooperate on planning and training on the identification, diagnosis, assessment of autism, and on the transition, that critical transition from childhood to adulthood. Now, if these things are done, then the benefits can be truly fantastic for the individual. But if they're not, then they can also be life-changing and they can be really challenging indeed. But I have to say, the strategy is clearly not the end of the story. It's just the start of a story. And whilst the lead must come, in the end, from local leadership in local communities, I want to say a bit more about that in a moment. There's still more, I think, that can be done at a national level, and I want to say a bit about that. We just recently announced that there will be a new children's and young people's health outcome strategy. And this will be developed specifically to look at the life course, to look at the life chances of young people. To support this, we've established a Children and Young People's Forum under the leadership of Christine Lenahan, who's Chief Executive of the Council for Disabled Children, and Ian Lewis, the Medical Director at the Alderhay NHS Foundation Trust. I hope you will take the opportunity to input into the consultations that will go on leading up to that strategy, because the forum will be discussing the way forward in the coming months, and I would certainly want to make sure that your views are taken into account. And if we want to make things better, then we need to first find what's happening out on the ground. We need to have the ability to demonstrate progress and enable people to benchmark themselves. So last April, we published new tools for local authorities and NHS bodies to support localities with the delivery and monitoring of implementation of the strategy and the statutory guidance. So the Learning Disability Public Health Observatory has been finding out from local authorities just how far they have got in delivering the strategy. When the results are in, they'll be put on the Learning Disabilities Public Health Observatory website, and I hope they will begin to form the basis of an atlas showing both what is happening in the best places, but also the opportunity for people to see the variation so that there can be appropriate challenge of those variations, especially where they are inexplicable. And I think this will enable people to use that as a tool locally to inform their commissioning as well. So far, 9 out of 10 areas say they have commissioning plans for the services for adults with autism either in place or in development. And clearly, some of your discussions are about that today. And local plans are important, but I think it takes more, again, than just a piece of paper. It does take that essential quality of leadership to make real change happen on the ground. And that's why it's so important that local authorities appoint an autism lead, senior enough in their organisation to have some real influence within the authority to drive forward those plans. But as I said just now, it's no good charging ahead if what we're doing isn't based on the right inputs in the first place, the wishes and personal needs of people with autism. And that's why the strategy recommends the creation of autism partnership boards. And again, I'm glad to say that over half of local authorities in England already have such boards. In some places, like here in Greater Manchester, there's been an autism partnership board for over 10 years. And these boards, I think, can bring together different commissioners, stakeholders, services, and those affected by autism to discuss and then lead on the improving services in their area. It's this sort of joint planning, this sort of cooperation and collaboration that is, I think, what integration is all about. It lies at the heart of the reforms that are currently the subject of considerable debate in Parliament. And at their essence, it is about placing the individual at the centre of what service providers and commissioners are all about, not as a byproduct on the periphery. Now, I know there's a huge amount of noise and some concern about the health bill, so I'd just like to say a few things about that. Because whilst central government can set the framework, whilst it can remove barriers and work to increase awareness and really work when it comes to delivering the strategy, when it comes to improving the situation on the ground, I think that's a challenge for everyone here. Because the autism strategy has never been about a top-down process of imposition. It has to be a co-production, it has to be co-designed and co-delivered at a local level. And it's not about setting targets and milestones in that context. It's always been about empowered local communities coming together to get things done. And this, I think, is the case right across the plans we have for modernisation of the healthcare system. And it is about integration of care across the NHS, across social care, and other local authority services. The integration mustn't stop at the boundaries of those systems. It has to include housing and other aspects of public services. It's about putting people with autism right at the centre of the plan to improve their lives, and as much as possible, place them in control. And this is exactly the same with the bill. And also, it will be the case with the forthcoming social care white paper that we will be publishing this spring. And we want to push power away from central government and down to the lowest possible level. We want local services to be based on a robust assessment of local needs, to be designed by local professionals across the piece working together, and for individual patients and service users and carers to be in the driving seat when it comes to how services work for them, and for there to be quite clearly no decision about me without me. Now, I think one of the main criticisms and concerns that's been levelled at the Health and Social Care Bill is that it makes integration harder. And I have to say that this is absolutely the opposite of what the bill will do. It's more than just the new legal duties that are going to be placed on providers and commissioners to integrate their services. It's down to where power lies in the system in the future. And many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the establishment in your local authorities of local health and wellbeing boards. And these are going to be crucial to delivering on this, because these will bring together all those with an interest in local health and social care, and indeed other parts of public services, including public health, from the NHS to voluntary groups, social care providers, local politicians. And they will draw up the local needs assessment, but more crucially than that, they will also produce the local strategy to fulfil those needs. And commissioning plans will have to follow those local strategies. Now, improving services so that individuals, families and the whole community can live healthier lives and have a better experience of the health and social care system is really at the core of this. And the autism strategy, I think, sits firmly, full square with that approach. Now, the new arrangements will make it easier to bring people together, easier to draw on the skills and experience of different players in the system to actually identify the best way forwards for local communities. And this is, I think, just as true for autism as it is for any other aspect. More than that, this is not about having talking shops. It's about actually placing power in people's hands so they can be held to account, but also they can make the progress that needs to happen. So let me just talk about some of the progress. And I'll get into the announcement in a moment that you said was good news. A huge amount of work has taken place over the last couple of years around developing consistent pathways for diagnosis so that we do deliver against nice clinical guidance for diagnosis and the management of autism. Newly diagnosed patients being given advice and information. The lead professional having to be appointed in most local areas to develop diagnostic services. And we now have nice guidelines covering diagnosis, referral and management of autism among children and young people, and similar guidelines for adults are out to consultation and are due in the summer. And NICE have also been consulting about conditions and diseases that should be in their library of 150 quality standards. And before I say anything else, I think it's just important to say quality standards are going to be absolutely at the heart of the reforms. They will guide the basis on which the National NHS Commissioning Board will judge the performance of clinical commissioning groups. They will set the framework for so much of the way in which the system behaves. So I'm really pleased to be able to announce that the proposed adult autism quality standard has now been referred to NICE, that there will be such a quality standard, and that will therefore be an essential building block in the way in which CCGs will do their work in the future. And not only that, as part of the legislation, in the future, NICE will also have a lead role in producing quality standards for social care as well, drawing on the expertise of professionals such as yourselves in the field, and also the expertise by experience of people with autism and family members. And part of the autism strategy is about having an impact right across government. And I just want to mention a couple of examples of that. Lord Freud has highlighted the importance of increasing employment for adults with autism. Department of Work and Pensions and NAS, the Research Autism and employers are working together to get people with autism into work. And the Department of Education has just published its Green Paper Support and Aspirations, looking at special educational needs, and will shortly be publishing its response to the consultation that it had on that document. So all of these things are about setting out ways to improve knowledge and skills of those working with disabled children and young people and SEN, and including training and resources in autism. If I just conclude, because I'm keen to get on to your questions, I think it's very important as we move forward now that we make sure that there is good information to enable people to benchmark their services, both in terms of the outcomes that are being achieved for people with autism, but also to enable real challenge about why there is variation that can't be justified on clinical or any other basis. And that, I think, will be a powerful tool for local accountability, a powerful tool for driving improvement. And we also need better information to plan and commission services with robust local prevalence data on autism and up-to-date joint strategic needs assessments. These will be an absolutely key tool for driving improvement across the system. And by being clear and transparent, I think at every stage, we can hold our local authorities, the local NHS and others to account for the quality of the services that they are designing and then delivering, and for the quality of life of people with autism living in their communities. And as we devolve more power down, as we place more focus on local leadership and personal control, as we work to drive up outcomes, I think it won't only be the statistics that start to look better, it will also be the lives of people like John that I was talking about just now. And he and people like him will be able to live more independent lives, will be able to access the help and support that they need, and I think most important of all, they'll be able to get on with the things that really matter to them, which is in the end what all of this should be about. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate that, and also your willingness to entertain a couple of questions. Anybody have some questions? Yeah. Oh, those people picking up their bags. There's one. Okay.
The Autism Strategy and the Autism Act have obviously been very powerful and certainly very welcome. One of the concerns I have is that the Autism Act only has mandatory requirements for social care and health, and yet the basic rationale for the Act and indeed the strategy is that in order to make existing legislation operate effectively for people with autism, special provision is required. And yet surely on the basis of that argument, the Autism Act ought to have mandatory requirements linked to all essential public services.
And that, I think, was very much one of the issues that was debated at the time the bill was going through Parliament, and one of the issues that the last government considered quite carefully, and it took the view in the end that they wanted to limit it specifically around health and social care. Having said that, what we also have within the Act is an obligation to review the strategy, and we have to do that in 2013. And certainly one of the things I would want to look at very carefully is the evidence of where the strategy was bearing down on unacceptable practices in other parts of government, both nationally and locally as well, so that we do have a joined-up approach. And my colleague Lynn Featherstone in the Home Office, who leads on equalities issues across the piece, and my colleague Maria Miller, who leads on disability specifically, are both, I think, very open to discussions as to how we use equalities duties as well to drive other action across other government departments.
I'll take that as an invitation, which I'll accept to engage with them. Thank you.
Good.
Okay, we have one more there here.
Thank you. The Autism Bill does focus very much on health and social care, and you have a great deal of responsibility for it. So I'd just like to ask you a very open question and say, how would you rate the way that the needs of children with autism are met by the Education Service?
Well, I think if Sarah Tether was here as the Minister with responsibility, I suspect she would be candid.
I'm asking you.
No, I suspect she would be candid, and as she's not here, I can be candid on her behalf. The point I was going on to make is that it's one of the reasons that we have published and are now piloting some quite radical changes to the way in which special educational needs operate in this country. For the first time, clear requirements to produce a joint plan across all aspects of the public service support that should wrap around a child and their family. And it's already, I think, beginning to demonstrate its worth in those areas that are piloting that. I think there are other tools that can be used to support that, the development of personal health budgets and the ability to combine them with personal care budgets, I think, again, are a way in which it allows families to be able to use the resources more constructively in ways that better meet their needs. So the Green Paper response is going to be out in the next week or so. I think it will say some very interesting further things, but I think Sarah Tether would be quite cross with me if I pre-announced the outcome of that process. But there's been some good challenge back, and I think we'll be responding very positively to some of the challenge we've heard around how we can improve SEN in the future.
Thank you.
Okay, we should, one more. Okay, one more.
Thanks. Perhaps I should declare an interest as a member of the NICE Guideline Development Group for Adults. The National Audit Office and among other people, drew attention to the importance of low-level services to support people in the community. Yet we still hear of very rigid practices by local authorities. The lady who spoke yesterday said that personal budgets and the way that money was spent at a local level was sort of restricted in very traditional ways. Do you have any comments about that?
Yes, I mean, one of the things that I think we will want to nail in the white paper on social care that we will publish later this year is the very restrictive interpretations that some local authorities place on the payment of direct payments or the provision of personal budgets. Because we know in those places that have taken a more liberal view of allowing people to be autonomous individuals with as much independence as possible, that allows them to use the resources much more creatively. And if you just provide a limited menu of options that tend to be fairly traditional in character, and you can only get it from one particular place, that isn't giving people independence, it's not giving people choice, it's not giving people any sense of their own self-worth and control. So absolutely in the white paper and in the subsequent legislation that we'll be publishing, we will be looking to strengthen the rights around budgets, the rights around self-directed care and support for people in the future.
We could